Good morning, and welcome.
Check. Sorry.
Amy's ready to go. Welcome, and this is the final day of the ISS, and it's really great to see all of you here. We hope you had one more great day, and then we're off to do what we're doing. So today morning, we have two speakers, Amy and Brenlee. Amy has been involved in wheelchair seating since beginning her career. Amy worked for the Cincinnati Children's Hospital in the past, where she was involved in both outpatient and inpatient settings. She's presented lectures both nationally and internationally. Amy is currently the pediatric and standing specialist for Permobil and is an active member for RESNA and APTA. So please welcome Amy. And our second speaker today will be Brenlee. Brenlee is an occupational therapist and ATP who owns a private practice in Toronto area. She provides assessment and treatment to a variety of client populations, more specifically brain injured and the spinal cord injury clients. She has a special interest in the area of seating and mobility. Brenlee is also a well-known presenter and presented internationally on various topics related to seating and mobility. She is a member of the Professional Standards Board of RESNA as well. So welcome both.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for getting up early on the last day and sticking with us and being here. I hope it will be well worth your while. Before we get started, that was excellent introduction. Thank you very much. And I did want to make very clear that I do work for Permobil, so I want to make that disclaimer out there. We're going to be talking about power wheelchairs specifically, which is a product of Permobil, but it's more about the techniques and the skills that are required to utilize those different types of wheelchairs. So it's not going to be product specific, but I just wanted to make that disclaimer. And as we move forward, more important introductions. These are my babies. I like to include little fun pictures. Those of you who have seen me speak in the past know this about me. So I have 15-month-old twins at home, Isaac and Aubrey. You can see them here on the left. And then I have a 3-month-old who's here with me. So if you've seen the little red stroller going around through the exhibits or in the hallways, that's my baby girl. And she's here with me, and my mom's here helping me with her. But that's what I get to go home to today. I'm very anxious to do so. And this...
Those are my babies.
That's Brenlee's baby. So we'll go ahead and get right into it. Today we're going to speak about power wheelchair driving skills and how you can maximize functional outcomes for your clients. There's different things that we can avenues, I guess, that we can take and discuss when talking about optimizing driving. That's another way I like to think about it. Is how do you optimize someone's driving skills in order to allow them to most efficiently interact with the world and get around most effectively? Well, part of that is deciding what base to use to begin with. As you all know, there are front-wheel drive, mid-wheel drive, and rear-wheel drive platforms. And they all perform just a little bit differently. They're not identical. And so that's going to guide you in your, first of all, your recommendations. When you know more about the client's goals and lifestyle, what's their environment like? Where are they going? You know, what's the maneuverability requirements for these different bases? What type of transportation needs do they have? Medical issues are going to guide not only your base selection, because there are implications for things like suspension on medical conditions, but also the powered seating that's available on the various platforms. You know, not every chair offers every function, so you have to do those kinds of assessments as well. And then the second part of this recommendation process is to attempt to objectively quantify these differences, and sometimes we have to make some compromise. Because we have this real-life information, we have these great products, but we know there's no such thing as a perfect wheelchair. There's always some degree of give and take in situations. And so we have this real-life information, but we have to create that realistic expectation of what the equipment's going to do for them. So one thing that I found in my life, in my practice, is that, and you'll get this sense as we talk about the different configurations, I'm a huge fan of front-wheel drive. I think it has a lot of benefits. The issue with front-wheel drive for many people, I believe, is that they're not given the opportunity to acquire that technique and the skill that's required to use that. Now, some people get in front-wheel drive and they do amazing right off the bat. And I think those are the users we're seeing a lot in front-wheel drive, or if they're coming out of front-wheel drive. But for those of us who are in clinics where we have a very short period of time to assess someone, and we put them in a front-wheel drive and they say, oh, it kind of feels weird the way it's driving, then we'll say, okay, try this one, and we give them maybe a different model. If we would have taken the time, or if we could have, I shouldn't say would have, if we could have taken the time to really show them some specific techniques and driving skills and given them the chance to learn that technique, the front-wheel drive may have worked better in their particular environment. But because we didn't have the time, because we maybe didn't have the knowledge about this, they were just put in either a rear wheel or a mid-wheel configuration. And that's okay, but it might not have been optimal for that person. And so the reason that I even started to think about this topic and talked with Brenlee about it is because I feel like there's a lot of people out there that are in mid-wheel drive is by far the most common drive configuration that we see. I believe there's a lot of people in mid-wheel drive that could benefit from the characteristics of front-wheel drive, but just weren't given the opportunity or had the proper instruction. And so that's kind of why this presentation was even created. Now at the end, we're gonna get back to some of the evidence about learning and what it takes for someone to really learn, and comparing that to what reality is for us. So just hang tight and we will get there at the end. Brenlee's gonna talk about that more. Okay, so we have these 3 different configurations. How do we choose? What are the differences? If you've heard me speak before, some of this information is going to be similar, but we're just going to go through it pretty quickly and then get into some cases and some more specific information. And for some reason, this is not showing up here on our thing. Oh, I know why. There we go. Oh, yes. Sorry, I forgot to mention. Some people were asking about the handout. And we did not have the handout ahead of time published, but if you would like to have that handout, our email addresses or our cards, you can email one of us. I think that's in the information. We do have information in the syllabus that narratively goes through exactly what we're going to be discussing in today's lecture, but if you'd like to have the actual handout from us, just email us and we'll get that to you, okay? So we're going to start with rear-wheel drive, and what are some of the general perceptions of rear-wheel drive? I'm going to go quickly here. Typically, rear-wheel drive tracks well. It's being pushed. The casters are being pushed forward, so it can track pretty well, and sometimes that can result in higher speeds, although we notice and we'll see with today's technology that's not always true anymore. So this is, again, just generalized perceptions. It's not product-specific. Each product is going to perform individually. It is the most sensitive to weight distribution. This is probably, in my mind, one of the more negative things about rear-wheel drive. What does that mean, Amy? What are you talking about? Well, rear-wheel drive, the way it's balanced, you have a very narrow window of opportunity where you can position a client to get that optimal weight distribution. If you've ever worked with a client in a rear-wheel drive chair, if their weight is too far forward over the front casters, what's going to happen? We call that front loading the casters, and those casters are going to resist movement. It's going to perform not as well. It's going to be jerky movements, those types of things. Okay, if you move that weight too far posterior back on the chair, then what happens? We have this rearward tippiness. In rear-wheel drive, most of your weight, where's my little thing? That's a small little pointer there, but I am pointing at the back of the chair. Most of the weight is in the rear of the chair. So if we position that person's weight too far posteriorly, it's going to be tippy, and you're also going to compromise your seating angles that you're able to achieve. So if we wanted to get to 50 degrees of tilt, we might not be able to do that in a rear-wheel drive configuration because of that stability of the base and the tippiness. Typically, rear-wheel drive can have very good suspension. There are rear-wheel drive models that have zero suspension. So again, that's a very product-specific situation. When you're climbing obstacles, with any front casters that swivel, like the rear-wheel drive has, and also we'll see the same thing in mid-wheel drive, it really needs to be straight on. You need to get started from right where you're going to be climbing so that those front casters are aligned appropriately to get over that obstacle. Those front casters can also have some implications in stand pivot transfers or leg positioning if someone has some aggressive needs there. Rear wheel drive configurations do offer, I guess is not the right word, but do have the largest turning radius. So they're equated with less maneuverability, and we'll see some research around that as well a little bit later. Moving to mid-wheel drive. Mid-wheel drive is probably one of the most stable bases because it has 6 wheels on the ground. It has 2 extra points of stability, so that's a positive. But the con of having 6 wheels on the ground, as we'll see a little bit later, can be maybe the roughness of the ride might be a little bit more sensation there because you have 2 more points of contact for that energy transfer. It is pretty intuitive to drive, and the reason it may be so intuitive is the pivot point is very close to the user's head. And that's one of the things when I was trying to figure out how can we objectify this thing we call intuitive feel. It's not an objective measure, but I think that if we could relate that to something objective, it would be how close to that pivot point, that turning point on the chair, is the user's head. So mid-wheel drive, for many adults, we're sitting over the drive wheel, directly over the drive wheel, and that might make it feel more intuitive to us. I would like to contrast that with, example, pediatric clients or very short clients who have a short sitting depth. When they're sitting in a mid-wheel drive chair, they're in front of that drive wheel. Their head is in front of that drive position, that pivot point. In a front-wheel drive, that person is sitting over top of that drive wheel there as well. So I think that that's why kids pick up front-wheel drive so much better. That and the fact that they don't have a preconceived notion of driving a vehicle or anything like that. So just a little tip that might help you maybe with some decision making. So the obstacle climbing, like I mentioned, needs to be straight on. The front swiveling casters can also possibly interfere with lower extremity positioning needs or stand pivot transfers. Now the mid-wheel drive chair is going to offer the smallest turning radius based on physics and based on the mechanics of the chair. Now, as we know, a turning radius is directly related to the length of the wheelchair. So if you have a mid-wheel drive configuration, but it's twice as long as a front wheel or a rear wheel drive configuration, that statement is not going to hold true. So understand that this is provided that we have similar size bases that we're comparing, and mid-wheel drive will turn in the tightest turning circle. Okay? Front wheel drive. Front wheel drive is also a very stable base in that powered seating that we're typically using when we have a power wheelchair user. Typically, you're usually at least having a power tilt system on that chair. Not always, I understand, but most of the time when you're in this rehab equipment, you do have a power tilt involved. And so when you have that addition of the powered seating, your weight in a base of a front wheel drive chair is more forward. When I tilt the person back, that's shifting their weight more rearward. And so you get this nice balance and this nice stable platform. Now, where that is not true, as many of you know, let's say I'm going down an incline, right? And I do a quick brake or a quick stop. That forward momentum, that forward weighted base is going to shift that weight forward even more and result in some what we might call tippiness. And that's why many front wheel drive models will have these anti-tip wheels on the front. Again, I think that this could be an intuitive way for people to drive. Some people feel like that's, a weird statement because many times we're hearing just the opposite, that front wheel drive is the weirdest configuration to feel when we're driving. But some research supports this, and also just my experience, especially with kids, is that it is pretty intuitive for some individuals, but those that it's not intuitive for can learn that technique fairly quickly. If given, again, the opportunity, the proper instruction. So hopefully this class will help you provide that opportunity for more people. It can climb obstacles from any direction. This is one of the big advantages. The front wheel is pulling the chair over obstacles, around things, and so that's going to be important. There is this perception of poor tracking at higher speeds. One more thing I want to talk about obstacle climbing, I missed the little sub-point. Handles well across all terrains. One of the reasons that the front-wheel drive model does handle better in softer terrains as well as over obstacles is because not only is the front wheels pulling the weight over the obstacle, but when you're going through softer terrains, those front wheels are pulling the casters. The casters are trailing. And when you have a pulling of a caster or a wheel, your direction of force is forward and upward. So you're more likely to get through and over that. Whereas in a mid-wheel or a rear wheel configuration, those casters are being pushed. And when you're pushing a caster, the direction of force is forward and downward, making it more likely to get stuck in certain situations. And so that's one of the big advantages of this type of drive configuration. The poor tracking that people have talked about in the past, the fishtailing, things like that, that's really a non-issue anymore, especially with our tracking technologies, and I'll talk about tracking in just a second. Or I think we move that to later at the end, I'll talk about that. And then accommodating tight hamstrings or lower extremity positioning, you really have wide open capabilities to support various lower extremity positions because there are not those front swiveling casters that we're worried about hitting the feet or getting in the way when they're rolling down the road. And then as far as turning with the front wheel drive, it does have a tight turning radius, but it turns differently. And the way it turns differently is actually an advantage if you know how to utilize that technique. And it does what we call hugging the corner. So if you stay close to the side you're turning to, you can get the tightest turn around objects or around corners if you do it appropriately. So that's important to know. So what are these different maneuverability considerations? This is a slide that kind of summarizes, when I'm talking to a client in wheelchair clinic, and I talk about the different drive configurations, this is how I kind of explained what they were going to feel when they sat in the chair. Rear-wheel drive drives most like a car. You want a wider turn. You know, you think about turning into a parking spot. You're going to take that wide turn to line it up appropriately. The front end is what moves in rear-wheel drive. You can see that happening. Sometimes that feedback is good for users. In a mid-wheel drive, it's going to turn on itself, turn on a dime. It's a very tight turning, as we mentioned, but that also results in more of a quick turn. And for me personally, it is almost too quick for me. It doesn't feel smooth and nice for me, no matter how much I've adjusted the programming. I just personally, I don't feel comfortable in that. So it's different for each individual person. And then front wheel drive drives more like a forklift. The back end is going to spin. Okay? And that's a weird sensation for a lot of people. And so by telling them that ahead of time so they know it, they're expecting that, and they can then work through some of the techniques that I might be able to show them to help them feel more comfortable in the chair. So here's just a little illustration of three different drive configurations and how they might interact with a small bathroom with a sink in the back corner. Now, granted, I know that in this mid-wheel drive, for example, I hate that this doesn't point very well. In the mid-wheel drive, for example, they can maneuver back and forth and get lined up appropriately with that sink, yes. But we're talking about just one movement. Where are they going to end up if they drive in and turn? How are they going to get there? In the front-wheel drive, if, and this is a big if they go all the way in and then they initiate their turn, they can be lined up directly in front of that sink. Okay? Whereas in a mid-wheel or rear wheel, it moves out just a little bit because you can't go in quite as far and because of the way the chair turns, just by the physics of it. There has been some research. This is a research study done by Alicia Coons in Pittsburgh, and they looked at different types of wheelchairs, and three of the types of wheelchairs that they looked at for maneuverability considerations were mid-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive, and front-wheel drive bases. And what they found, I've highlighted a few things here because some of this I think is contrary to what popular belief might be. Mid-wheel drive chairs require the least amount of space for a 360-degree turn, and nobody's ever discounted that. So when I need to do a circle, okay, let's give a real-life example of that. Okay, I'm in an office, my computer is here, my printer is behind me, and I need to keep going back and forth to the printer or the telephone or whatever it might be. That's a real life situation where that tightest 360-degree turn would be the best for that particular individual. Okay? But if you see here, it did perform equally as well as front-wheel drive models on all other turning tasks. So the other turning tasks, front wheel and mid-wheel, performed equally, with the exception of the L turn. And that's the second little quote here, is that the front-wheel drive configurations, people were able to maneuver those in the least amount of space around that L turn, or a 90-degree turn. That's what I called hugging the corner. So from a maneuverability standpoint, front-wheel and mid-wheel drive perform fairly equally. Mid-wheel wins when I need to do a lot of just turning in space in 360-degree turns. Sorry. Front wheel wins if I'm going to be going around obstacles or around corners, around things. This is all provided the person is using that technique properly. Okay, so keep that in mind. Some of you might be saying, that's not what I've seen. Hang with me. A couple other quotes from this study is that mid-wheel and front wheel do better indoors or in confined spaces than a rear-wheel drive configuration would do. I think that's another statement that we all can agree on. This is an interesting part of this study, though. They found that maneuverability of front-wheel drive chairs may be more intuitive and easier to learn for users who are new to powered mobility or who have impaired proprioception, because those turns can be initiated closer to the bend. This is what I think, and I can equate to my pediatric experience, is that kids aren't really good at judging how far do I have to pass this before I can get in and clear this corner. They say, oh, we're going this way, boom, I'm gone, I'm going. Kind of more an impulsive reaction as well. And so if you have that type of user, the front-wheel drive model may very well turn the best for them, and they may be able to maneuver that better than the other platforms. So even though we say front-wheel drive is not intuitive or not as intuitive as other models, this study actually says it might be more intuitive for certain individuals and certain users. So be open to that possibility. And this is just a little slide that talks about the study. Basically, it says no commercial parties were involved. Permobil didn't pay Alicia Cruz to do this study. It was completely independent. So it is a legitimate published research study that you can cite if you're getting some challenges from funding sources, maybe about prescribing a specific model over another one. This is a research study that I have used and I've taught people to use to challenge those decisions. Okay, so we have some specific driving skills for each configuration. And like I said, front-wheel drive tends to be the most difficult or the least understood, so we started there. Front-wheel drive has different techniques that I like to tell people. One, and probably the most common one that I'll always say, is turn toward the obstacle. Turn toward the problem. What do I mean by that? And I'm gonna kind of come over here to the edge just to show you. So let's pretend I'm in my kitchen, okay, and these are cabinets or a countertop or something like that. And I want to go over here to the sink, okay? If I just turn, what's going to happen? My rear casters are going to crash, if you'd like to use that word, into the cabinets. I like to call it interaction with the world. Okay, that's pediatric practice there. So I'm gonna get some resistance here. I'm gonna bump into something, possibly do some damage. I don't want to do that, right? So anytime I'm against an obstacle or a problem, then I need to turn, just for a brief second, turn towards that problem, just back up ever so slightly, and then I can turn and go, okay? And that very small activity becomes second nature to front-wheel drive users. Kids who start in front-wheel drive do that automatically, but adults who have never had that experience have to be instructed and have to say, look, this is the characteristic. You love the way this performs when it's pulling through softer surfaces or getting over thresholds and things in your community. But one of the things that you're gonna have to remember in tight spaces, in the elevator is another big thing that I see. You know, I've tried to cram as many chairs into an elevator so I can make it in one trip, and I've got the one front-wheel drive chair back against the wall, and then I try to bring it out, and And I still do that. Oh, whoops. That's how you go around that. But again, once they learn and practice that technique a little bit, it becomes second nature. So don't discount that. I've heard many people say, I don't do front wheel drive because the back casters are bumping into walls all the time. Has that person ever been taught how to not bump into that wall, or do they just think that's just a hazard of their wheelchair? Okay? The next technique is pulling all the way in before starting that turn, and that's like that diagram with the bathroom that we saw. Okay? Another real-life example of this, I got a call from a school teacher or a person from the school saying, we're constantly having to put this kid in freewheel and push and pull and get him right where he needs to be to tie down into the bus. And I said, okay, how is that person getting on the bus? For me to understand how to help you, I need to know what is the environment, what's his technique right now. So he's on the lift, he gets off, he comes in, and his position is, let's just say, right behind the bus driver on the opposite side of the bus. Well, what was happening is he was pulling and turning in, or they were pulling him in and turning him in. I don't know who was driving at this point, and turning too soon. And so he was more in the middle of the hallway of the bus instead of over all the way on the side. And so just a simple technique of, okay, I want you to pull all the way in until his feet are just about to touch the wall in front of him, and then make that turn. That's all it took. Wow, magic. Just that little instruction. And so it's really important. We're doing our clients a disservice if we're not teaching them these techniques. Hugging the corner. If I know I'm going to go and turn right, actually, I'm going to do it here, but I'm not going to walk off the edge, right? So if I know I'm turning right around this table, around this corner, I'm not going to go in the middle of the hallway, especially if it's a tight hallway. Because if I'm in the middle of the hallway going down and then I initiate my turn, boom, that's where I'm getting those caster interference, right? I'm going to stay to the side that I'm going to turn to. That's another way to write this, okay? Stay to the side you're turning to. Stay on the wall that you're going to, and then initiate that turn. Again, kids do this all the time. We know we're going to go this way. I'm going to get way over as close as I can and do that. Makes therapists nervous sometimes because they're thinking, oh, they're going to crash into that wall. But they just like to be close. With obstacle climbing, and this has to do with the type of chair that you're using, the amount of force, the programming, the torque, all that kind of stuff. But one thing that I found, we have some very aggressive obstacle courses that we test chairs on. And it's always interesting for me to try to do and use these chairs in those situations. And what I found is that I have a tendency, when I'm going over a pretty aggressive obstacle, to get scared and kind of back off a little bit. And when I do that, that really disrupts that momentum going forward or that power going forward. And so I just teach people, when you have something to climb, just commit to it. Just go and commit. You can go, in some of these chassis, you can go very slowly, but you just have to maintain that forward force. If you pull back and pull off, then that's when the problems happen. This is a big one, okay? I mentioned the tippiness of front-wheel drive forward. What can we do about that? Just say, oh, get used to it, it's gonna feel like that? I'd like to say no, right? Teach people to tilt their chair. Like I said, most people are gonna have power tilt on these chairs. Tilt back before you go down out of the van or out of the whatever you're doing, or down your ramp at home. If you tilt back, you naturally get that nice solid balance in your chair, and you're much less likely to do that tipping forward. So that's a really good thing. Also, the other thing is to teach them, don't go full speed down a ramp and then pull back to brake fast. Duh, unless you like that feeling, unless that's fun for you, okay? So that's another thing, is just ease into it, go nice and slow down the ramp and tilt your chair back, and you will almost always keep that from happening. Here's an example of hugging that corner. So staying close to the side, to the pivot point. The rule of thumb is that to turn a corner, your pivot point, or your center of your axle of your drive wheel, needs to be at that corner or past that corner to get past the wall, okay? In any of the configurations. So front wheel drive, obviously you're gonna get to that midpoint of your drive wheel sooner than you will in the other two models. All right, now, Brenlee finally gets to talk.
Keep the lavalier on, I'll use this.
Okay.
Okay, we're just gonna, oops. We won't switch that lavalier back and forth. In between each of these, we just want to show you a quick case study just to give you a little bit of an example, and then, like Amy said, we'll talk more about sort of the learning process and the training process after. So this case study, you will see in a moment a video of Peter, C56 quadriplegic. He's been in a wheelchair many, many years. So this guy's been around for a long time. He had always traditionally been in a manual wheelchair, like many of our clients. After a number of years, I've known him, I think I've done 3 different chairs for him, so I've probably known him for at least 14, 15 years now. After a number of years, and he was still working and he was aging and he was having some issues, we did add power assist. So he's actually gone through the progression of mobility with his different pieces of equipment. He, at the same time that he had the manual chair with power assist, he had a part-time power wheelchair that, he bought. He didn't consult with anybody. It was there. Somebody sold it to him. No one knew about it, but he had it. This gentleman travels a lot. He does a lot of stuff, so he sort of just used this power chair that was never really prescribed for him or measured for him, and he just used it when he used it. So it was, self-taught learning, self-taught driving. And the chair that he had was a mid-wheel drive chair. He ended up developing a severe pressure ulcer. He was down for a year. So work is now over. He was down for a year. It was quite severe. Got back in contact with me. He was starting to finally get up. His pressure ulcer was resolving. And we said, you know what? It's time for power. And he agreed that it was time for power for a number of reasons. So we didn't just go to power, we went full-time power, power tilt, power recline, power elevating leg rest. We figure at this point, this is a gentleman who's aging with a spinal cord injury. He's already had a massive pressure ulcer. He's having all sorts of, overuse type injuries as well. If we're gonna go power, we're gonna put the whole shebang on it right now because we don't wanna wait 2 years for him to start developing other problems. So we went with everything, and he went front wheel. Okay, so he's basically had everything. Now, he's a very interesting man, and he's very able to do a lot of stuff on his own. So let's just watch the video, hopefully. Oh, I have to click. Okay, that's right. Sorry, it's not tap, it's click. He does drive, and he keeps his left arm where you see it, and no matter what we do, we can't get him to use the positioning on the chair. That's how he stabilizes himself. It's a habitual thing. When we were doing the front wheel, so basically, he didn't need a lot of training, but we went through the whole environment. We went through the bathroom. So you can see, just like Amy said, he went directly to where he was going, which is his sink cutout, and then he made the turn. And what he loved was that he can get so close in because of the front wheel configuration, and he can actually get to the sink, use the taps, and do everything on his own. Now, as Amy said also, just with the front wheel for him, I'll go to the next video, he does a lot of different terrains. He goes a lot of different places. He travels. He's been all over the world. And so, in regards to soft terrain, heavy terrain, bumpy terrain, all of those kind of things, this drive configuration really works out for him. And even though he's gone through, manual, power assist, he's been in the mid wheel and now he's in the front wheel, he just, easily went from one to the other. Doesn't always happen like that with your clients. There's some clients that need a lot more training and a lot more assistance. He just figured it out, okay? So I just have a couple of other video clips to show you. A little bit more of the indoor, and then I'll show you what we went outdoors and into his van as well. Oh, this is in his van, actually. This is going to the van from his parking garage. The nice thing was also is the van was already modified. Sorry, I know it's very dark. What we were able to do, I'll go to the other one because we were able to go outside, it's lighter. He didn't need to really change any of the modifications, and obviously with any change in equipment, if somebody has an adapted vehicle, you have to be really careful about that to make sure that you don't change the device and then screw up the whole vehicle and cost the client another, $20,000, $30,000. And again, the front wheel in the van lets him get right close up where he needs to be for to be able to get his controls. So he's just showing off here, going on the different terrains, and he took off on me, of course. That's why it's a little bumpy, because I'm trying to sort of jog behind him. And he just easily goes from one terrain to the other. And this was relatively soft grass because it was wet. And you can see it's not summertime, so it was a little cold. If only we could get that left arm to stay down. There's always trade-offs, right? And we know that, especially with our clients that have been around for a long time. It's very hard to change them out of some of their habits. This way you can see it a little bit better. It's a little bit lighter now. He loved this because it was just so easy that he could just go, he just basically goes right in, he turns it down a little bit, and then he just pulls in and it locks in place. And that's key. He can't be going back and forth and doing, a 3-point turn or a 5-point turn when he's trying to lock himself in to be able to drive. Yes, question? Yeah. He does that. He does. That's more for him. It's personal preference, and it's one of those things too, right? You can teach your client to do whatever. And as Amy said, he could have come back. You can tilt a little bit and then come down that ramp, and it's not a very steep ramp. For him, it turned out it was just more efficient, and he's very good at reversing. So he just, instead of actually going through the process of turning and coming down frontwards, he just backs right out, and all in one maneuver, he just backs right out of the van. So that was his choice. And it's one of those things, if you have somebody who can do those skills, and that makes it faster, easier, and he's okay with that, it was perfect. The nice thing with Peter is he has a live-in attendant who's been with him for years and years. So one of the things is, if he ever runs into problems, for the most part, he's never by himself. Which is a good thing. So if he was to run into any kind of trouble, there's always someone there. Because backing out, sometimes you never know what's there, or if there's snow, or if there's weather going on. But he was clearly able to do it, so that was his choice. Okay, Amy. There you go.
Okay, so let's move now to mid-wheel drive. And specific skills, like I said, this is sometimes seen as more intuitive, so you don't necessarily need to spend as much time maybe teaching these skills, but just making people aware of certain things with their wheelchair. When you're maneuvering, obviously the shorter you can keep the wheelbase, the better. So by being able to pull those legs in as tight as possible without having that interference with the front casters, that's going to make it more maneuverable in tight spaces. And so just making sure that people understand, if your legs are positioned out here, that's not going to maneuver as best as if they were closer. When you're turning around the obstacles, like I said, get that axle, the center of that axle of the drive wheel, past the corner before you start to initiate that turn. When you're obstacle climbing, like I mentioned before, line up your front casters to make sure you're hitting it straight on instead of, and if you're not understanding where I'm coming with that, the best example I like to give is if I'm outside in the grass and I have a patio, okay, and here I am, my wheel is here, my front caster is here. If I try to just turn up onto that patio, I'm not going to go anywhere because my front caster is hitting the edge of that cement. And so I'd have to just back up and just go over that patio lip forward, and that's what I'm referring to there. One of the challenges that I've seen people and experienced myself in trying these mid-wheel drive configurations are those softer curbs, those kind of waterfall curbs that dip down and then come up. And it's really hard to hit those straight on and not high center. In mid-wheel drive, you always have risk of high centering, and that's the last little point there, is that it is a risk with any mid-wheel drive chair. Some suspension systems make it less likely, but it is still a risk because you have 6 wheels on the ground. So what I mean by high centering is the front 2 casters and the rear 2 casters have good traction on the ground, but that drive wheel that motors the chair forward or backward is elevated slightly, loses traction, and just spins in place and doesn't move the chair. So to avoid that, what you can teach people to do is kind of going up at an angle. So if this is my driveway and I have a really big dip, it's my grandma's house, I always scrape my car no matter how slow I go and how big my turn is. I'm always bottoming out and scraping on her driveway, coming out of it to the street. So I'm going to teach them to kind of go up from an angle at the side. That's going to help keep traction on at least one of those drive wheels so that you can get up and over that. So that's another little technique that can be utilized. All right, and by the way, at the end, we're going to have some dialogue and questions. If anyone has any additional tips or additional things that you've had happen with different configurations, let us know. I'd love to learn more if there's more that you've heard. So here's just a little arrow showing that we do have to cross a little bit of the further, but then a front wheel drive to make this turn into this room. And if, depending on the width of the doorway there and the position of my feet, there's a chance here that my feet would hit that other side of the door jamb. And so what I just like to say here is that just because mid-wheel drive has the tightest turning radius doesn't mean it's always the most maneuverable in some one specific environment. And so you have to be able to know that the different techniques and the different ways that these drive configurations perform is important to understand.
So this is Brad, and Brad is C4-5 quadriplegic. He's on his second power chair. So the first power chair he received was right when he was leaving rehab, and that was when it was prescribed shortly after his injury. He is using a head array. He did try hand control. He's got a little bit of movement in the right arm, and they were trying some hand control, but the problem was it wasn't consistent enough, and he certainly didn't have the endurance to get through a full day, and they were going through periods of time of doing, part-time head control, part-time hand control, and it wasn't reasonable to sort of leave it. So basically, he is the head array. He wanted to stay with mid-wheel drive. That was the first chair. He's used to it. He doesn't want to change. Everything's working fine. The change, though, that he made from one style of mid-wheel drive to another was this chair that he got has larger front casters. And that was the main thing that he said was different. He lives in a beautifully modified home, but he does like to go, a little bit off-road, and he does, climb different types of terrains, and he found that using larger casters allowed him to get over some of the terrain and some of the bumps and some of the curb cuts easier with less bumping around, which again does make it easier to drive. He's using a head array. We know that the more your head's shaken around, if you're trying to use a head control, it's going to impact how you're able to drive. So the quieter his body is, because of the drive of the chair itself, the better it is for him to control his driving methods. So he went on, and he actually was talking for a lot of the time. I'm not going to put the sound on, but he was just sort of going through. So you'll see him, he just goes in the home. Although it's beautifully modified, there's still a lot of stuff. And his room specifically is set up for him. He can get around the entire house. You can see that nice tight turn, the swivel turn, so he doesn't hit the carpeting, he doesn't hit the furniture beside him. And that's sort of the family room. He goes into his bedroom. He does still have a little bit of a jerky method of drive. You can see that, there's a little bit of a start and a stop. And then he's just showing how he sort of positions himself in his bedroom when they're getting ready to do a lift, and he's got a ceiling track lift. And so this is part of it too, you know, he's going backwards a little bit, he's just showing where he positions himself. But again, that jerky motion, that's something that comes with practice and with his ability just to get used to, you know, he's very specific about where he wants to be. So that's why there's a little bit of start and stop. He's a cautious driver. I think that's part of it as well. Okay, let me just move to the other one. So he goes out of the bedroom and then he goes into the main hall. He's going to go through the kitchen, and what he wanted to show me was when you're through the kitchen, that's sort of toward the front entrance. And it's an entrance where there's the stairs to the basement, and there's a railing that goes all the way around, and there's a very small hallway. And he was showing me how sort of tight it is in that area and how close he gets to the stairway. And there's no barrier there, of course. Yeah, so he was sort of freaking me out. I was like, what are you doing? Yeah, that's how my mother reacts. I was like, oh, great. And then he just goes down, he just wants to show me going down this hallway, and sort of what he liked about it, he said, was, you know, obviously to get around tight spaces and his ability to get through the whole house. If they have visitors, you know, he can go to the front door and welcome people. He can take his friends out and say goodbye, you know, and he still fits on all these little spaces without hitting the, you know, the rugs. And even though there's a lot of stuff in the house and it's tightly spaced with beautiful pieces of furniture, you know, his parents didn't need to move all their stuff. He can just maneuver around it rather than having no furniture so that he has more space to move.
Can you do the left turn right there or no? Yeah. Okay.
And then when he turns left into this hallway, that's the other entrance into his bedroom. You saw that closed door before, so he has access both ways.
Okay. Yeah, can you turn around in this hallway? Yeah. Okay. Okay, do that, that'd be perfect.
One thing that I just noticed with his turning that corner, he kind of cut the corner a little, like I would say.
He was hugging it a little too much.
Well, but what's interesting is that he was able to figure out a technique, and his hallway was wide enough that instead of just doing that direct 90-degree turn, he kind of did more of a 45, had enough space to not hit his feet on the opposite wall, and then continued his turn. So he kind of cut that edge a little. So it was a very tight turn, despite the fact that he was using that particular configuration. So.
The stress of the videotape.
Did somebody have a comment? Hearing things?
Yeah, I would.
Okay, I think that's...
And this is the next one, mine?
Yeah.
Okay, so this next one is a young lady, and I'm going to use my Cliff Notes to make sure that I tell you all the details correctly of her case. She's 11 years old. She has an undiagnosed neurodegenerative disorder. She had a rear-wheel drive chair she first obtained when she was 7 years old, and now was here for presenting for a new chair, and ended up getting a mid-wheel drive configuration. And you can see her configuration here. She has very specific needs, and her joystick is unique. I don't know if you can see that there, the picture of the long stick with the ball on the top. And she needed that for her control because of her lack of motor control, I guess I could say. And so that's her chair right there. Lots of stuff, but she does it well. Now, the reason I got involved with her, she's not my client, but I was given this video from her school therapist, basically saying, help, we got this chair, and this is how she drives the chair. And so let's just look at her before photo, and you can see, I don't know if that's a sibling or a friend in front of her with the walker, but she's, you know, keeping up with her, but her path, she's constantly overcorrecting, right? Have anybody seen this happen before? So she's, oh, I need to go this way. No, I'm going to overcorrect and go back this way, and it ends up looking like a ride versus just nice straight tracking down the sidewalk, which is what she was intending to do. She's not doing this for fun. And that's something important too to note, especially when you're working with kids, is what are they doing just for fun? And what are they doing because it's necessity and it's happening inadvertently. And so that's her video before. Now this next slide, I'm going to show a different video before, another view of this, as well as after some programming adjustments. And I'll talk about what those programming adjustments were. So we didn't change anything teaching her to control her hand better. I mean, obviously that's an outcome we'd love to see, but really this was solved with just programming. And so I wanted to mention this because optimizing driving is not only about choosing the right drive wheel configuration, teaching the right techniques, but a lot of times it's about tweaking the programming just right for that individual. And wow, I mean, just the same amount of time. You can see that one's been done for how long now? So quite a significant difference. And what we did was we adjusted the turning speed to 9% and the turning acceleration to 10%. And you don't have to write these numbers down. It's not like a magic formula. But basically, you need to know that we adjusted the turning speed and the turning acceleration. And then the other thing that we did is we adjusted the tremor dampening. And we made some adjustments to that. I think we turned that to 20 and increased the neutral zone, or as in the PG electronics, it's called the deadband zone. We increased that to 25. So basically, she had 25% of a neutral area where the chair wasn't going to respond until she got outside of that. So that combination resulted in what you saw there and her being able to drive forward. So again, this is something we just need to remember, that we have all these great tools and this technology. We need to be able to experiment with that and utilize that to really optimize driving for these individuals. And lastly, rear-wheel drive specific skills. Wider turns around corners, I mentioned that. Obstacle climbing, just like the mid-wheel drive, straight on. And then to really just be careful with that weight distribution and stability when navigating inclines or rough terrain. And specifically with a rear-wheel drive model, you're kind of talking about the opposite of the front-wheel drive. So when you're going up a large hill, you want to be careful with that because that's where it can be a little more tippy. So here you go. Here's the wide turn into this bedroom. That's kind of more what you take when you're using a rear-wheel drive configuration.
And then this last case study is a lady with a long history of fibromyalgia, arthritis, numerous other conditions. You know, the list that goes this long, she just sort of started listing off everything. But the basic premise of the majority of her conditions is they're all pain related. So she's, you know, and if you have anybody with chronic pain, we know that they are going to fluctuate from minute to minute, day to day, in obviously their seating and their tolerance, but then also what she feels when she's driving. She needs speed. That was her, you know, main thing she wanted. She wants to go fast. She needs to get from point A to point B, and she's not messing around. She needed suspension. Again, just so that she doesn't feel every bump. She's very active when she's able to get out and about, and she's outside and, you know, she motors. So she uses the chair obviously for basic and essential mobility, but it's her transportation method. She'd prefer not to be on the bus or on public transit. She just wants to go. She goes outside all weather. She'll just go whenever, okay? And she's a longtime power wheelchair user, currently in rear wheel. She basically tried everything. So she's very specific, very good at searching out things on the intranet, talking to every technician possible, every vendor, every rep. You know, she's been around. And we finally got her, you know, a good team that she trusted, but she really, you know, it took a long time for us to get to a final prescription, and the vendor that we were working with was very, very patient and very good, and got her a lot of different equipment for her to try, which is what you need sometimes, and it's not as easy as it sounds. We all know that, to try 2 or 3 different power wheelchairs with power positioning on them as well. And we were able to do that, luckily. So I'm just gonna show you these clips because she basically, it was like, you know, she wouldn't slow down for me. I said, okay, let me videotape you. She didn't want me to videotape from the front. That's why everything's just from the back, and she just took off. Oops, hold on. So she just went. She almost actually, well, she didn't almost get hit by a truck. She almost hit the truck. I was screaming at this point, watch out. So she knows, to go straight on. She knows, she just wanted to see, how fast can I get down the driveway, and when I hit that threshold of going onto the road, how does it feel? She was doing all of that kind of stuff. Hold on, let me just get to the second one. And then also sort of going then, up and from the outside to the inside and doing her turns and then getting back into the assessment room where we were. And she's a very good driver, but what you'll see here when she makes the turn is clearly she goes into a very wide turn. She goes far away from that wall, far away from there's 2 doors there, and then she lines herself up and makes her turn to get back into the room. Okay, which we know is different from the other 2 types of drive configurations. The other thing with her too is even though with a rear-wheel drive you do have that larger turning radius, she always has her feet in a little bit of elevation. So you have to be aware of that too, that even makes her overall front to back package of the chair longer because her feet are sticking out even that little bit more.
My mute off. Okay, and just to wrap things up, just wanted to also go into a little bit of characteristics and how this makes a difference in driving performance. The larger the wheel, the better you're climbing, and the better negotiation of softer or uneven terrains. So the bigger the wheel, the better. Size does matter when it comes to wheels on wheelchairs. Jenna, that's supposed to be funny. You guys, okay.
Too early.
I know, too early. So what is a large wheel? Typically in power wheelchairs, a 14-inch drive wheel is considered to be a large wheel, and 8-inch casters on front wheel or rear wheel configurations are larger, and then a typical mid-wheel drive caster is about 6 inches. The fewer the wheels, the smoother the ride, and that I mentioned at the beginning, and that's the impact of 6 wheels on a chair compared to 4. You are, just by science, going to have less energy transferred into the chair without those 2 extra points of contact. So that's why rear-wheel drive, front-wheel drive may fare better in the smoothness category than a mid-wheel drive will. That also does have something to do with suspension as well, of course. Tracking technology, I mentioned that a couple of different times. One of the things in Sarah's case is we considered, wow, does she need some type of tracking technology added to that chair? Tracking systems typically are an extra charge, especially if you're adding them after the fact. And so that was something we didn't want to do right away. We wanted to see if we could achieve the correct outcome without buying something else. And so that is what happened. It was successful. We didn't have to go this route. However, there are different types of tracking technologies. There's gyroscopes, there's encoders or tachometers, there are similar terms. And then what the big difference between the 2 is that gyroscopes actually monitor the actual chair position. So they're more accurate, okay? The tachometers, the encoders require the traction to work for the wheel to have traction in order to work because it's measuring revolutions per minute. It's seeing if there's a balance in how the wheels are turning, okay? It's giving information from right to left. And so that's why if you don't have traction on one of the wheels, it's going to give false information and not work effectively. Very important when you're using switches of any kind, a switch drive control. Tracking technology is, I would say, critical in those situations because you want the driving to be efficient. You don't want them constantly overcorrecting like Sarah was kind of doing with her joystick. But you can imagine, was it Peter? No, who had the head array? Brad had the head array, and if he didn't have any tracking capability, then he'd constantly be correcting himself. Front-wheel drive, also, that's the technology that allows you to go faster without fishtailing in front-wheel drive configurations. If you have things like ventilators or added weight to the chair, that's going to change the way that chair tracks. And so that's important, too, to utilize tracking technology in those types of situations. And then we're going to end it up with Brenlee.
And just one thing about tracking as well, and as Amy mentioned, there's extra cost to some of these things. It's not just, in the regular programming. And we all have different funding agencies, I understand that. When I'm doing a funding form, we actually have to do a clinical rationale if we are actually putting on, autocorrection. That's the big X that you put down. And a lot of people will sort of say, oh, well, I can't justify that. Yes, you can. That's key. If you look at that video that Amy showed and you see the way that client's driving and all that weaving, and first of all, the safety issues, and second of all, the time taken, it is a very easily justifiable extra cost. It doesn't take a lot of words. You give, what the issues are with the client, what they're trying to achieve, and what the additional tracking actually does, or what the outcome is. It's not that difficult to do the justification. So sometimes if you're sort of hesitant, oh, I'm not sure if I should be prescribing that or if I should be justifying it, you really have to think a little bit down the road as well, because most of the time, yes, we should probably be, because it's going to make life that much easier, safer, better for the client. Okay, so let's just talk a little bit more specifically about the training process. You can tell I'm Canadian, right? All right. And actually, most of these slides, well, all of these slides are actually referenced through, and one really good resource is, and you can see it down at the bottom, it's the Wheelchair Skills Program. It's a program that was developed and it's documented. It's from Halifax, Nova Scotia. It's www.wheelchairskillsprogram.ca. The document is fantastic. So I'm just going to go through some of it because it's really a really good all-inclusive training. It goes through the background. It has learning. It has structured sort of learning, what's the word? Not modules, but you can actually, okay, session 1, session 2, session 3. So if you think of the learning process, if you achieve success, okay, so we set goals, we achieve success, that's skill acquisition. That's what we're looking for, is acquiring skills. Skill retention is different than skill acquisition. You need to be able to hold on to that skill and carry it over to, number one, the next day or the next session, or carry it over into a different environment. All right, so we need to have both. We need to get the skill and be able to have our clients keep the skill so that they can utilize it elsewhere. Well, that's the skill transfer, utilizing it elsewhere. So there's sort of the 3 steps: skill acquisition, skill retention, and then being able to transfer it to any situation. When you're looking at training clients, obviously safety is key. Okay, so we're not just going to take a new driver and sort of, take them out and say, off you go. Well, our parents did that to us when we were learning to drive, but you have to think about that, right? Think about how we teach people to drive vehicles. Hopefully they go for lessons, hopefully they're supervised, hopefully there's somebody that's giving them feedback. It's sort of the same thing, but again, like with somebody like my client who just took off down the street, if I didn't know that she knew how to drive, I would have been screaming louder and running faster, okay? There's certainly a risk, though, of injury and overuse even within the training process. So as clients are learning to use chairs, especially the manual chairs, if they're learning manual wheelchair skills, when they're learning to do wheelies and stuff like that, they can get into some overuse depending if they start with the wrong patterns of movement. But with power wheelchairs, you have to be careful, because if somebody is driving and you're going down the street, can they hurt themselves by driving off the curb by mistake? The young lady with the tracking issues, she could have hurt herself if she went off the edge of the sidewalk, but also injury to others. Okay, in facilities, out on the street, are they going to, run into somebody else, run somebody's foot over? So you have to watch that during the time that you're actually doing the training and the learning. Spotters are recommended during training. Okay, so not a trainer, but a spotter. So somebody who's actually going to stand by, be there, be close during the actual practice of skills. It's recommended that you have somebody. Now, we're going to go through all this because this is the ideal, and then at the end we're going to talk about some of the issues, because you're already probably thinking, well, who's this spotter person going to be, if I'm out in the community? So we'll come back to that. Now, the trainers specifically can be a clinician, could be other team members. If you are actually doing a very structured training, or even if you're doing unstructured training, the person who is teaching the skills needs to understand what the skills are. Doesn't mean that person needs to be somebody who is in a wheelchair, But as Amy was describing the skills and the turning and the hugging the corner and, you know, getting closer to things, you need to understand that and be able to give the description to the client. You can't just be a trainer and not really know what you're supposed to be teaching, right? Which makes sense. But the reality is many of us maybe don't know all of those little clues to the best way to drive because maybe we've never really sat in a power wheelchair and driven. So it's one of the things to consider. If we're teaching our clients how to drive a power wheelchair, maybe we should try and take more opportunity to learn a little bit better ourselves. So if you're not sure, utilize the equipment that's around you and actually see how you would do before we start trying to teach somebody else, okay? The trainers can be experts or non-experts. So we can carry over, and if somebody's carrying through with their training at home, we can utilize the people at home, the caregivers, the attendants, the parents, the spouses, but we need to make sure that they understand what the skills are and what they're assisting in the training. So there's sort of a transfer of skills from trainer to trainer. 5 minutes? Can't be. Okay. The assessment's ongoing. Okay, it goes through the entire time. We're always reassessing. We want to make sure that we don't prejudge the outcome and sort of assume that the client will either really do well or not do well. And that's set achievable goals. They actually say 5 to 10 goals per series of sessions, and then you can upgrade your goals. Obviously, individualize the training process. Determine who your learner is going to be, because sometimes the learner isn't just the client. Maybe the learner is the caregiver as well who's going to be with them, or a parent, or a teacher from school. So there might be other people around that you need to actually teach so that they can assist the client. The clients need to be trained also how to direct a caregiver or a helper, how to decline help if somebody runs up because they just want to, help them, how to sort of say no thank you, and how to actually approach somebody and ask for help if they're in a situation that they get themselves stuck. And then some things to look at: what's the actual structure? Where are you doing the training? How motivated is your client? What kind of demonstration and verbal instruction are you giving? And basically, it gives the suggestion that we do less talking and just let them do. And feedback is, every second attempt is what they suggest, as opposed to us just constantly talking through as our clients are going. Let them focus. They suggest imagery, so the client to imagine and do imagery of where they're going and what they're trying to achieve. They also suggest, good, concise, positive feedback. And if you want to learn a skill and you want to get better at a skill, you have to practice the skill. It's not simulated. If you want to get better at doing a task, you have to do the task. Practicing is, how specific is your practice? What area? Are you practicing in a clinic, then trying to take it home, or are you practicing at home? The client needs to have the equipment to be able to transfer their practice to a different location. How much practice? This is very interesting. It says that sometimes it needs over 200 attempts to actually get a skill. They suggest series of 2 to 3 hours of training over several sessions. So start to imagine the real world. How much retention, the variability, so different situations, different weather, different days, different times of day. Do you do mass practice all at once, or do you space your practice out? They suggest that the client sleeps after they learn a new skill. So you have 4 to 6 hours at least. Maybe you have you sleep on it, and then you don't learn a skill till maybe the next day. And then you go very simplistic and you progress. So you either add different skills or you add to a skill, like adding speed to a skill. So there's different ways to upgrade the learning. So here's some issues, okay? I blew through that really fast, but here's the issues that come. Where are these training programs, right? So you need to search them out. Is there a training program that we can utilize to actually get our clients signed up? Is there something specific? Can they get a referral? Can they go there? Can they pay for it? Is it free? So see if you can search out the programs. If there aren't programs, I work in the community with my clients. I'm doing assessments in their homes, and we're trying to prescribe. Sometimes you go for one visit and you're supposed to be able to say whether they can be a power wheelchair user or not. It's very hard. We know that we have a lot of clients that could be power wheelchair users, but they need practice. But there's no one to help them practice. There's no one who's going to pay a person to help them practice. There's no program, and we need to prescribe the piece of equipment, but we haven't really determined if they're a safe driver or not. Okay? So how many sessions? Who's going to pay? Who's responsible for doing this? Is it me as the prescriber, or is it the vendor who's selling the equipment? An interesting question, right? I don't have an answer for that. And then even with full training, if somebody went to a power wheelchair camp for a week, there's still going to be barriers. Weather happens. Everything's hunky-dory until there's 3 feet of snow on the ground. Everything's fine until there's construction, and they can't go on the street or the sidewalk that they're used to. They have to cross the street to another place. And, you know, the construction guys cover up, you know, stuff. They put big bumps over pipes and stuff like that. Temporary barriers. So there's always going to be an issue, even if your client is trained. That's where you hope that they have that skill transfer, that they can figure out how to get where they need to go because they've learned this skill and now they can modify it. Okay? There you go, hon. There you go. So we're right on we have a couple of minutes, I think. Any questions, comments? You guys still up with us? We do have a mic up here, so if you have a question, just put your hand up. Or any comments?
So my question is about the little girl that you all adjusted the programming. Was that simply in her outdoor mode, or did it transfer across all modes? Because how did that work for her inside the home when you opened up that field to where it wasn't very responsive?
Yeah, and
in tighter
actually,
areas?
it was globally across all of her driving profiles that she had. So she did 2 profiles. She had the indoor and the normal or outdoor mode, and it was in both, and it translated well from what I know. Again, she's not my specific client, but after that change was made, her mom sent me that video back, and I haven't heard any issues with her maneuverability inside the home as a result of that.
I wanted to ask about footrests. If you have a patient who's transferring on their feet forward and you need to have swing-away footrest for them to clear for transfer, how do the different front-wheel drive, mid-wheel drive, or rear affect the footrests and the overall length of the chair as a result?
Sure. So when you're having, there's different techniques and methods, obviously, when you're transferring off the front of the chair. Some of them, the chairs have the center mount type of design that you can flip the foot plates back. Some have where you can get the foot plates actually onto the floor and transfer off on top of the foot plates. But if you do need a swing away type of mechanism, I prefer the first 2 options if possible. But if you do need that swing away mechanism, you are going to sacrifice. You're going to sacrifice probably in the seat to floor height of the chair is where I've seen it most commonly, especially if you have, in a front wheel drive, it won't matter because you don't have a front swiveling caster there, and your foot plates can be right in front of the drive wheels if you need them to be, and that hardware can be there. But in mid-wheel drive or rear-wheel drive configurations, you have to clear that front revolving caster. And so it's either position them out in more of 70-degree hangers or something that they may not need or their hamstring length may not allow, or raise the seat to floor height of the chair, and so now their foot plates are on top, if you will, of those front revolving casters. Now we know there's pro and con to everything. You raise that seat to floor height, now they can't get under any tables or access in and out of their vehicle might be affected. So that's why I prefer to see if there's another option with that. Or front-wheel drive, that's one of the key reasons why you might want to choose front-wheel drive for that client.
One other note is obviously the foot platform, which is great. You have to look at how's that client, if they're, say, doing a transfer or a stand pivot even, how are they able to raise the foot platform back up? Because very often they can't lean down all the way to do it by hand, or their feet are actually on it. So sometimes it gets a little bit dicey as to can they do it themselves? Can you add, we have a lot of vendors that will add a strap onto the foot platform that it sort of holds on up at the armrest that they can pull a strap, get their feet off and actually pull the foot platform up. So it's one of those things like anything else. Can they actually manage that piece? There's one here and then one back at the front.
With the last case study, was her preferred driving position kind of a little bit of tilt with the feet sticking out? Was that part of the taken into account with going to a rear drive?
Yes, and she, because of her pain issues, she always sits in a little bit of tilt. The only time she goes into full upright is when she's getting out of the chair, and she always has her feet in some elevation. She never has her feet flat on the floor. So yeah, and that's part of it, stability-wise, and it was just, like I said, she tried every other method, but that's the one that she ended up preferring, was sticking with rear wheel.
This is a question not about the front wheels or mid or back, but because you have extreme weather conditions, what do you do with the joystick and driving in extreme weather?
I know what I've done in certain cases is bread bags. That bread come in. I always say carry a bread bag with you. If it starts to rain, bread bag goes right over the joystick in the hand and can protect that. So that's a quick and easy, low-tech option. I know that we, at Permobile, there's some accessories, you know, being a Swedish company, very cold in weather, there's something called the hand warmer with a dome. And so it's a more protective against the weather and the cold, where it actually has some heat in there to keep the hand functioning appropriately too. So there's some technology. I'm sure there's other accessory companies that might have something, but low-tech wise, I just say carry a bread bag with you.
Yeah, and that's what we do too. And we have clients that will just carry some sort of bag or whatever, that if it does start to rain or snow, they just put it over your, you know, your hand, and or obviously the whole control mechanism, because that's the brains of the unit. I've had clients though that have said, you know, I was just told just don't go out. Well, you know, we live, you know, I live in Toronto. It's not, you know, it's not igloo kind of location, but you know, it rains, it snows. Of course, what if you're out and it starts to rain? So the option of telling your clients don't go out in poor weather is not the option to give. Try and give some practical solution.
All right, let's thank our speakers for a great presentation. And thank yourselves for a good turnout here on Saturday morning.